Welcome to the Intercut Podcast, the weekly show going over the TV, movies, and entertainment that people can't cut away from. I am your co-host, Zachary Shevich, and joining me, it's not TV, it's Arturo Zurita.
I'm excited to be here, Zach. Excited to have back, for the second time, Taylor, talking about HBO and a bunch of other stuff. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back.
For sure.
Yeah, we're excited to be joined by Taylor J. Williams, recently of his return to YouTube, also gracing us with a talk about HBO and other things. We'll get into that, as well as changes to the Academy Awards and Universal's AMC standoff with AMC. But first, we're going to make sure you are subscribed to the Intercut Podcast. Make sure you're subscribed to either the video podcast here on youtube.com/intercutpod or the audio podcast available on most podcatchers. Also, follow Intercut on social media, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. We are at IntercutPod. That's at IntercutPod. That's short for podcast. Art, let's start the show the way we start it every week here with what we are watching. What you been watching, buddy?
I think I have something that all three of us have been watching over on HBO, but I have also been able to catch some horror movies now that I'm at home during the day, and I don't have to be too scared. Antrum was considered the deadliest horror movie. I don't know if you guys have heard about this at all. It's this movie within a movie within a movie that's talking about a 70s horror film that pretty much killed everybody who watched it. They submitted it to festivals and people died who had screened it. So this is the movie that finally has found that copy, and it's got a doc at the beginning and a doc at the end telling you what makes that movie the deadliest movie. It's a fake mockumentary type thing, but it's an interesting look at like a mock movie that was lost. It would have been more effective if they actually did a Blair Witch thing, which people realize it's way harder to do now with social media. You know, if they would have made the actors in the Lost 70s film actual actors who weren't in NCIS next week, maybe it would be a little bit more believable. But it does this cool thing where it's pretty much breaking down that in horror movies, and I think this is beneficial to a lot of people who are like getting into dissecting film. This does it very in your face, but it pretty much tells you that, you know, in Aladdin, Genie's good because he's round. And cartoons that are very roundish are technically good, whereas Jafar is very pointy, so because he's pointy, he's evil. Pretty much they tell you, so the movie you just saw had 127 triangles. Triangles stimulate the mind for horror. And I was like, oh, this is an explained video at the end of the movie. So for
it's
those
like
of you who...
meta-textual elements and self-referential kind of stuff.
Exactly, you know, because it's all made by the same person. There's no lost film, but it's an interesting way of like trying to dissect horror within a horror that you created within the horror documentary that is also fictional. It's been getting a lot of buzz online. Like, it's one of the movies that every single video I make, it keeps getting recommended. You'll watch Antrum, you'll watch Antrum. I have 3 more days before I realize whether this is the deadliest movie or not. So this may be the last Intercut podcast I do, but I'm recommending it only if you're willing to risk it. It literally has a 10-second thing at the beginning. You are about to watch Antrum. 10, 9, 8. So it commits to it, but I would still give it a rent at the end of it. What I wouldn't give a rent it, though, but you could stream in May, and I think is worth the full combo. I haven't finished it yet, so you guys are going to finish the conversation for me. Betty on HBO.
All right, yeah, let's get into Betty, the new HBO series premiering its first episode on Friday, May 1st. It's directed by Crystal Moselle, and it's kind of adapted from her 2017 feature debut, Skate Kitchen. It has a lot of the same characters, even same character names. It's got the same basic group of actors, a sort of modern look at skate culture through this group of high school / college age girls. They're around, I don't know, 18, 19 maybe.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's this kind of eclectic show that is very slice of life. What did you guys think of it?
Taylor? Jay Williams?
We've seen, I should stipulate, we've seen 6 episodes, Taylor and I, the full first season. You've seen a couple of them?
Including Skate Kitchen. So it's interesting to see the parallels that both have, but what did you think, Taylor?
Yeah, I watched the first episode without having seen the movie, and then between the first and second episode, I decided to watch the movie.
You went to go watch it?
For some reason.
It's on Hulu, by the way.
Yeah, and so it was It was interesting. I enjoyed the first episode, and then watching the movie, and then going back to the show, it was kind of weird seeing what they kind of had to repurpose. They kind of shifted some of the character attributes around. Like, Jaden Smith's character's kind of split into two different characters in the series. But the thing that stood out to me in the movie was the editing style, and I thought the best parts of the movie were when there wasn't really any narrative going on, or if there was, it was like cross-cutting with like three different just random times or whatever. And so it was
I'd say
cool
that lack of narrative is also something that you feel in elements of the show too.
Yeah, definitely. And it definitely feels like it was made for television. Like, there are some, like, each episode has like one or two essential plot points, but it's like so minimal that it still feels it still has the heart of the movie, I'd say. It was I think the movie was shot on film, and this is very clearly shot on digital. It seems. So there's a little less intimacy, I guess, in the cinematography, but
Totally.
it still has like that docu style with the editing, which I thought was
What
pretty
you had
effective.
mentioned was something I brought up to Zach, because he loves, also on Hulu, the Oscar winning, right? It won the Oscar, right?
I think it only was nominated Minding the Gap.
Oh, it won it in my heart. Minding
yeah.
the Gap, yeah. So it's like those moments that you said where it's not really the talking, but the cinematography. It took me back to that movie a lot. But like you said, I feel that while the movie, it's like it's got that mid-90s feel. These girls come together and, you know, they're skateboarding. The show to me feels a lot like Broad City. Like you said, those little plot points. You know, now it's not just like, oh, we got to go get the thing from the skate park. It's while we're doing that, we run across a creepy old man who wants us to open the door, but this isn't even the house that he lives in. So it's like that's the way that they're fleshing it out a bit. Zach finished it as well. I'm curious because Zach and I always talk about this. Do you think, having seen the movie and now having seen the show, franchising an indie, you know, the whole idea of sequelizing and expanding stuff, is it worth it? Did it merit it being turned into a show?
Well, it's a little hard to say because it's become such a popular thing just in the past few years to make a show out of a movie. And I mean, stuff like, I don't know, Limitless, or I think Shooter had a spin-off show. All these
Rush
like,
Hour.
We'll be getting
yeah,
a new
all these network
Snowpiercer show
shows.
soon.
Those are like really weird because it's the same character dynamics, but it's like TV actors, so it's like they're trying to do the same thing but in a different canon, I guess. So I think this worked because it's the same cast and the same characters, and it's a little weird at first, like having them meet via like different circumstances and have different backgrounds than their characters in the movie. But what I didn't realize until today, actually, was the movie was originally a short film. So there are 3 iterations.
Right.
There's 5.
5? Oh.
Yes.
What are the other 2?
So pretty much she met them. Just as the director had also done The Wolfpack, which is a great movie also from Sundance. So just like those guys who she met in the streets of New York, she ended up meeting these girls in the subway. And they were talking about tampons. A scene that ends up making the first movie.
Yeah.
Because of that, they flourished. They were originally supposed to be a part of a fashion ad, which was supposed to be like the 12th in these ads. That ended up expanding into what was supposed to be a short. That ended up expanding into Sundance saying, nah, make this a feature. Which she then goes, okay, but I want to make a documentary along the way. And then HBO went, nah, you guys are doing really good. Let's make this a show.
Wow, they're really...
All of
getting
that
as
to
much
say,
out of it.
since Zach was telling me, they actually, because as they are playing themselves. These are actually a group of girls who have their skate kitchen in New York. And Zach was telling me that the show, because I also think that it's a good adaptation in terms of not pulling a Hangover 2, but actually using the money and resources to flesh them out. I think the actresses feel way more comfortable after having a movie premiere and doing the tour. But Zach was telling me that they actually take some of the making of stuff and they kind of incorporate it into the show, like some of the elements on how they met with taking pictures, which I think is a really cool thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, to circle back a bit to that idea of expanding film into a television series, I think ultimately what you have here is a vehicle for a good hangout, right? And sometimes the thing that you want with TV is being able to hang out with this group of characters, hang out in this world that you just kind of want to explore more of these surroundings. And HBO, I feel like, identified this film and Crystal Moselle as potentially something that they wanted to expand. Similarly, and this comparison comes with a lot of baggage. I mean, very minimally, this comparison. What they did when they took Lena Dunham and Tiny Furniture and expanded that into Girls. I think in a way, this is almost an HBO attempt at getting a 2020 version of Girls. This eclectic group of young women just kind of facing life in New York City with modern problems, and in a way, retrofitting it without some of the problems that haunted the Lena Dunham show. But you take another indie voice that has only really made one movie, and you believe enough in her vision of that to kind of explore it through a series. And by the end of the first season of Betty, I did feel like it was getting that momentum. You kind of get the group coming together again, and you feel a direction for them to go in their evolving talks about patriarchy and matriarchy. It makes me feel like there might be a decent future for this show that as it expands, and hopefully people catch on to it.
It's HBO. They're doing it with Parasite. They successfully did it with Watchmen. Now they got this one. So if you're going to do a reboot, or not a reboot, but if you're going to reimagine it and continue it, please go to HBO. Please.
All right, so let us know about Betty when you guys get to catch it. There's some other stuff that we've been watching. Taylor, anything that you've wanted to talk about?
Well, since I've been home, my parents have been, dry for content. So I've been watching Ozark with them, which
nice.
It's been solid. I'm on season 2. I know season 3 just came out, so I'm still getting into it.
Much better.
I've also been rewatching Twin Peaks with my brother, who got me into the show. He wants to watch the 3rd season that came out in 2017. And so we're rewatching the original show, and I'm showing him a couple David Lynch movies he hasn't seen to, sort of contextualize season 3. But between that and school and getting back on YouTube, I haven't been able to watch what I've been trying to watch, which is Mr. Robot, which I just started a week before I got evicted, which is kind of surreal because season 1 is mostly East Village exteriors, which is pretty cool to watch, just hanging out. But then it became really timely as I got into season 2, because it's New York in the wake of some catastrophic event. They're selling emergency kits at Walmart. Businesses are closing down. We've got these montages of the main character. He's in routine in a confined space, and so it's and it obviously develops into something a little less relatable, but it's still...
But you're trying to get an escape from the real world just to go to Mr. Robot.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, that show has, in many ways, some of them less fortunate than others, found
season 1
to be a predictor of the future in very eerie ways.
Yeah.
Didn't they also predict the Ashley Madison thing?
From the Ashley Madison thing to a reporter getting shot literal day before they were going to release that crazy stuff that is... Yeah, it's a crazy show.
Yeah, no, I've been... I knew it was good just from word of mouth and stuff, but for some reason I just never got around to watching it when it was airing. And I kind of regret that, because I'm really impressed with it so far.
Yeah.
I'd imagine that you're a big fan of the way that it's shot, because it's such a striking show.
Yeah, and it's not even it's just the composition alone. It's not impressive lighting setups or anything. They just set the camera up in a really nice place with a lot of 1-point perspective and headroom, and that's about all they do, and it works so well.
Have you seen Comet? Also by him? He does that he did that right before starting Mr. Robot, and that's all he does is that headroom. That's all he does for the entirety of it. I'm curious to know your thoughts on that one, considering the framing that you were talking about.
I feel like you even get a bit of that style in Homecoming, his Amazon series.
A little bit, yeah. I could definitely see that.
All right. Well, as for what I've been watching, I saw a bit of the Hulu and BBC 3 show, Normal People. The first episode is out now. There will be 12 in total. I've seen 3, so I'm not that far into it. It's essentially the problems of being hot and horny in high school. I've never really been that much into romance as a genre, and this feels simple and without conflict even for a romance series, but it's based on a popular book by Sally Rooney that apparently people love. I can't really tell why from the show. Like, I'm not charmed by the characters, and frankly, I makes me question the director Lenny Abramson, who I've liked Frank and Room, his films before, but he hasn't really done much since being nominated for an Oscar for Room. And he directs the first 6 of this 12-episode series, and I'm not taken with the tone or the direction of it at all. I've been seeing some positive coverage of it, and I'm frankly a little bit baffled. So maybe tell me what I've been missing, because I'm not seeing anything there.
Interesting. And what's this on?
It's on Hulu, and for our international friends, it's on BBC 3.
Okay.
But something that I have watched more recently that I have been more taken with is Deerskin. It's the new film from Quentin Dupieux. I don't know. I'm not good with pronouncing French
Wild
things.
director.
I know him as Mr. Owizo, the electronic artist, the EDM musician. But he has made a few very interesting films. Rubber, probably the most popular of them. This latest one stars Jean Dujardin as well as Adele Haenel, recently of Portrait of a Lady on Fire. And it's about a man who comes into possession of a deerskin jacket that he becomes obsessed with to the degree that he wants no other people to wear jackets. It is as weird as that premise sounds. It gets pretty bizarre, but it has this kind of low key style to it that I found very charming. Like it's a little deadpan in its approach and the seriousness with which it takes its premise. Taylor, I know you got to catch it as well. Were you charmed by it?
Yeah, I was actually a big fan. I didn't realize until like 20 or 30 minutes in when I looked on IMDb that he had directed Rubber. And I was like, oh, this makes a lot more sense.
Yes.
Because I saw Rubber not long after it came out. I was only like just getting into movies. And I've been meaning to rewatch it because back then I thought it was just like the dumbest thing. I think I'd probably appreciate it a little more now. But yeah, I was really impressed by Deerskin. At the beginning I was a little I didn't love the look of it just because it was so low contrast. I think they shot it on like Sony mirrorless cameras, probably on log, and it looks like they didn't do any color grading whatsoever.
Right.
But I don't know if I just got used to it or if it just looked better as it went on. But
in a weird way, it almost matches the tone of the film, that dry nature of the comedy.
Yeah, and even like the subject matter. I think, at least thematically, it's going for sort of a meta commentary on filmmaking, which is always
really
fun.
Have you guys seen? So I know him from Rubber, but the last movie I saw of his is one of those where I sat down, it ended, and I had no idea what I just watched. Reality, about a director who like is given like 48 hours to make something. I felt like it started and it ended. Watch that movie. It's got some of the craziest visuals as well. It's more bonkers than Rubber in my opinion. So I haven't caught Deerskin yet. I think I played at TIFF in New York. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. If you're saying that it's like about filmmaking, then I wonder what his movie about filmmaking actually says.
Yeah, it's one of those where it's like some movies are kind of like they reach a level of like being smart enough that it almost makes fun of the audience for trying to get meaning out of it. So I feel like he's definitely one of those people who could just turn around and be like, I don't know what you're talking about. I just made a movie about a guy who likes jackets. But it's like there's clearly like, you know, the specifics of the plot are clearly like have parallels to the filmmaking process, especially for like art house films specifically.
I have to check this out immediately then.
Yeah, a very fun movie, a strange one though, maybe not for everybody, but if it sounds like your cup of tea, it's in virtual theaters this week, so make sure to check out Deerskin as well. That's what we've been watching. Let us know what you've been watching in the YouTube comments or by shooting us an email. The address for that is intercutpod@gmail.com. We are going to move on to Yay or Nay, where we break down the latest happenings in entertainment, starting with the Academy Awards announcing a few rule changes, the most notable of which is that films that debut on VOD or streaming will be eligible for Best Picture for 1 year only as a response to movie theaters being closed across the country. We anticipated this coming a couple weeks back on Intercut, but what we didn't anticipate is that the Academy also announced that going forward, the awards for Best Sound Mixing and Best Sound Editing would be combined into one category, Best Sound. This brings the total number of Oscars being televised from 24 to 23. Taylor, yay or nay, the combined Best Sound category is a good move for the Oscars?
I'm going to say nay on this one, just because so many aspects of film, even down to, you know, cinematography, have a lot of people working on it, and then there's pretty much one or two names that get the award. But at least with sound mixing and sound editing, you can separate it into sound mixing is a production job and sound editing is a post job.
Right.
And so, you know, even though there are departments within those two things, that it's already like there's a lot of politics separating them and stuff. I feel like just the nature of them occurring in completely different stages of the production should be enough to... And I know it's not one of the more popular categories.
Don't matter.
The fact that it's two, like, I get it from, like, the Oscars are kind of scraping to continue at this point.
Right. The argument would be is that it's primarily very few people know the difference between these categories, and sometimes you even get overlap with the same people being nominated in both categories. We as film nerds, like, we care about this stuff and we like this. I think we'd like to see there be more Oscars
categories,
maybe not less. But, you know, as the Oscars has been trying to get their telecast to be shorter and to end on time, you know, they've been looking for ways to sacrifice awards. And, I agree that it's pretty unfortunate they've chosen this one.
It's nasty because you have like a positive thing that's happening here, right? The 1 year only where the streaming and everything is available. But, you know, it's like when government passes a law or they have something going on over here because they're really trying to pass something else. It's like you got rid of something that's, as Zach said, we've been wanting stunt categories. We've been wanting casting categories, not taking away from people who deserve it. And that's a great point. I think so many people don't realize, because every Oscar season we get the Twitter moment that lets us know the difference between the two. The fact that one is done months before the other, practically, you know, they're so separately apart that something like that would happen. But in terms of the big one of the discussions Zach and I were having is if this is a 1 year only thing with the streaming, right? And I don't know if you have a follow-up for that, Zach. Do you think that movies will still want to compete for this year's Oscar season? Or will they want to hold off for the theatrical stuff next year? Because we all know New York, LA always gets that one movie right at the end to qualify for what? Nothing else but the Oscars. But that's open now. What are your thoughts?
Right. I think it will be interesting to see what ultimately ends up competing for next year's Oscars, because you look at movies like Fast 9 that have moved to next year already, and yes, that's not exactly like a prime contender for anything but some technical awards, but any movie that a studio has put a significant financial investment to, if they are worried about whether or not they can make that money back this year, then we're ultimately going to be looking at a limited pool of what's ultimately considered for an Oscar. It might be like a bunch of indie movies, mid-major budget movies, and then Netflix willing to drop $100 million on a thing that will only go on streaming.
Yeah.
But yeah, I certainly could make for an interesting crop of nominees for this year's Oscars.
Have they laid out criteria in terms of like, because even before, it's not like it was just movies that played in theaters. It had to have like a week-long New York or LA run. Is there?
So I believe what they said is that the movie within 60 days of its release, whether that's VOD or whatever, has to be made available on the Academy's streaming website, their internal streaming website.
Okay. So anyone could submit?
Yeah, theoretically.
Can I submit ketchup?
Theoretically, I don't know, like, if we can submit something. Like, I wouldn't know who to ask.
You know,
but,
like that's interesting.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I truly think that a lot of movies are going to shift over. I just think back to the South by thing. Hey, Amazon's going to do South by online. Can't wait to see all the big all the big movies said, nah, we're going to choose something else. And it's the indies, which is great. So I think it's going to be a year where if the Oscars just don't decide to just completely banish it completely, people have been put right in their front lawn. Sonic 2020, let's go. They want that to go all the way. People want Invisible Man to go all the way. So I think it's going to be a really interesting year, depending on how all the deals happen for the fall festivals. Because as we know, we are nowhere near Oscar season yet. It's still months away, so there's a lot to there's a lot to still play with.
Yeah. NBC Universal CEO Jeff Shell was interviewed this week by Wall Street Journal about Trolls World Tour's success on premium VOD, saying the results for Trolls World Tour have exceeded our expectations and demonstrated the viability of premium video on demand. As soon as theaters reopen, we expect to release movies on both formats. Now AMC Theaters, the biggest theater chain in America, is saying they will no longer play films from Universal in any of their theaters. Citing the comments made by Jeff Shell, Art, yay or nay, other studios should feel threatened by AMC's stance on Universal.
I'm gonna say nay, that they should feel threatened.
I agree.
I think AMC's the one losing here, no matter what. And it doesn't seem like it's coming from a place of negotiation. I think it's more like if Universal's going to do that, it would be more cost effective for them to just not screen a movie at all rather than pay the cost to screen it and have no one show up because they have the VOD option.
Taylor J. Williams of the Taylor J. Williams YouTube channel. I am going to play devil's advocate here and say you can't have a Universal movie if it's not broadcast universally. Fast 9 ain't going to make the money Fast 7 did or Fast 8 did if you're not playing in the #1 movie in America. Regal just followed suit. So what I would say as the theater system, and I don't agree, but if I'm the theater system, I'm using my last headbutt, my last chance here, and that's to tell you, as a studio, and a lot of people seem to not like get how it works, but the big movies, they're all projects. It's 10 projects with like 3 of them being multi-million-dollar stuff that will pay for all the indie stuff. If you take that away, it doesn't just change the landscape of theaters or streaming, it literally changes the budgets of movies.
That's true. I also think it's really weird that Trolls is the precedent that this is all falling on.
Oh, yeah. How did it go, Zach? It went big milestones. We had the jazz singer, Trolls World Tour, Wizard of Oz somewhere in there.
The movies that changed movies forever.
It is crazy. I wouldn't have it any other way. I would, you know? Of course. Why wouldn't it be Trolls?
Yeah, it feels fitting that Trolls World Tour is the movie that changes movies in 2020, I guess, among all the crazy things that we're dealing with now.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with what Taylor's saying here, is that AMC is in a place of somewhat desperation. I mean, the last time that we heard about them, you know, kind of in a big news sense, is that they are close to bankruptcy. And they need... There is a viability to the system that requires that these movies are not readily available so that people feel their only option is to go to an AMC theater. Once that's taken away, like
That's fabrication, yeah.
they have even more insecurity. And I get why AMC is like existentially worried about any big movie going to video on demand. But I think you see through the success of Trolls that has been reported about, there's, you know, if studios feel like they have a potential path to financial success through going on premium video on demand, they'll take that path if that's the easiest path. You know, they have better revenue shares when they put it out on premium on demand than in theaters. Now there are certain movies that kind of need to be in movie theaters, but at the same time, once the next Fast and Furious movie comes out, once Candyman comes out, there's no way AMC is going to turn down that kind of money. They need people to come into movie theaters.
Don't you think it's just going to create a bigger shift in the studios of them doing what we've been saying? Indies go to streaming and only the big blockbusters go out?
Well, I think we have a pretty interesting experiment that in our next topic. Universal Pictures announced that the upcoming Judd Apatow Pete Davidson movie, The King of Staten Island, which was set for theaters in June, will now be going to VOD. It follows the success of Universal's Trolls World Tour release, which has reportedly earned $100 million after 3 weeks on VOD. Yay or nay, The King of Staten Island's VOD release will also be a financial success for Universal.
I'd say yay, depending on the budget. Because I am one who believes that a lot of these movies will do better in these type of platforms because they don't have to worry about that cut that you had just mentioned, which many times goes 60-40. Sometimes it even goes 70-30 if we're talking Disney movies over here. So for a movie like this to be able to get its independent release, already a South by flick that, again, ignored all the Amazon Prime and all the other digital festivals that were going on, I don't think it's good. Obviously, it's not going to do the Trolls numbers because we're forgetting that Trolls, what they got going on is it's not available for purchase, and so parents have been renting it.
Right.
But I think it's going to see the exact same amount that it would have if it was in theaters because it's an independent movie. And while that's a good thing for the independent movies, I think the independent movie makers always have a dream to be in theaters. And that's what's going to be stripped away here when this is all said and done.
Yeah, I hadn't really considered the budgetary aspect of that, just because, like, the first I heard of this movie was the announcement that it was going to VOD. I didn't even know it was a thing that existed. But yeah, I mean, considering it's probably pretty low budget and they get a lot more of the revenue per view, and also it's not the kind of movie that, like, you know, for instance, Trolls, it's the kids who want to see it, but in theaters the parents would still have to get tickets for themselves anyway, so it's really 4-in-1. Most people, I think, that are going to be watching the Judd Apatow movie are probably, you know, them, maybe one other person, so it's I don't really know how to calculate that, but
right.
I see what you mean. I think a great point you saying that you haven't heard of it is because it was supposed to premiere at South by. If it had that festival push, word of mouth would have happened. You would have been like, oh, that movie. None of that happened. So I think that's something studios are taking into account. I've been saying that holding off your movie to then release everything at the same is not going to be possible for all these projects to be released. And I think they took into account that they lost the entire word of mouth, just like Lovebirds, which went to Netflix, and pretty much every South by movie has decided to release and not wait for theatrical stuff because of that. Before the VOD announcement, you were like, what the hell is that? So it's almost like they don't have a choice if they want to salvage some of these movies that had a time release, especially a lot of them that have ads already in place, like Trolls did.
I mean, I do think this is a bit of an experiment for Universal. They've seen that Trolls, a movie that has a built-in audience, it's a sequel to a highly successful children's movie, and it is also being released in a venue that makes it very easy for young children to watch. That feels like a worthwhile experiment, and we're seeing Scoob, another children's movie, recently went straight to VOD because that feels like a viable audience. The audience for an R-rated Judd Apatow Pete Davidson comedy, I don't know the viability of that. Like, we've seen even Onward did very well when it went to video on demand, but we're not seeing the Birds of Prey's, Bloodshots, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always is the adult skewing stuff do quite as well on premium video on demand. The budget's lower, so hopefully it doesn't need to make up as much money, but yeah, I don't know if the interest or the hunger is there. We saw a good Pete Davidson movie, Big Time Adolescence, go to streaming
Hulu.
and not really get that much attention.
That's a great point, and that's the guy who's supposed to bring in the money.
Yeah.
And like Taylor said, Trolls World Tour, that would have been $80 in the theaters for my family. You're Mexican? $150. You watch it at home, it's $20. You are technically spending twice as much if you watch this movie at home alone.
Right.
Did you guys read that Paul Schrader interview where he?
I haven't.
I don't remember what the primary, like what the headline was, but he's talking about, you know, production having like 3 days left to shoot of his film and virtual filming and that. But he talks about, he likens this whole situation to like a sports draft, and he basically sees this year's generation of filmmakers who were supposed to have their big break at festivals, rather than them having the option to postpone or seeing any success from this. He thinks they're kind of fucked, and next generation, next year, the same category of filmmaker, they're going to have their films, and they're going to be newer, and the upcoming whatever. And so
it's like all those seniors that are missing their graduation ceremony.
Yeah, what do you guys think? Do you think that it's a whole generation of filmmakers who are just, due to these unfortunate circumstances, are kind of done?
Having been to a lot of film festivals, I would personally say no. I couldn't even give you the number, because there is going to be people who they have tried everything for this shot. You know, we know this for this shot to get into South by, canceled. I do think the best filmmakers, not to whiplash it here, but when we were at Sundance and we saw a movie called it was something Darkly, and she pretty much said, I have been making movies for years, and I would get accepted to the film festival up there, but this is my first time down the mountain. I think filmmakers whose movies didn't make it this year, they're not going to stop making movies. It sucks that they got halted, but they'll be back in 2 years. Yeah. If you're not going to be back in 2 years, you never stood a chance this year then. But it does suck that people are missing their opportunities because they won't have that word of mouth for South by, Cannes, Tribeca.
That being said, though, because so many things are being canceled and so many things are being delayed, and that includes a lot of productions are being canceled, next year's Sundance doesn't have the movies that could have been being
easily
made right now.
Yeah, we're paused for 3 years.
So I think ultimately a lot of these filmmakers will get their chance. It just may be delayed. And maybe there are a few people who slip through the cracks. And, I think that's one of the things that I've been skeptical about with stuff like the online version of South by Southwest. Just, will those filmmakers generate that kind of attention they could have at a real South by Southwest? Will the people who are putting their movie out on VOD right now be kind of swallowed up and not get that chance to build word of mouth in the same way? Ultimately, I think the good movies will emerge, but it's just a little bit harder to.
Those movies are done, though.
Yeah.
And we can't make more movies right now. Streaming services are getting bigger, and Netflix is the only one with completed stuff. So all I'm hearing is there's a market. Taylor asked a question. There is an answer. That's all I'm saying. We just went through the stuff coming out in May for everything but Netflix, and it's nowhere near close. So if there's content that's ready to be sold and could be marketed while everyone's at home, there is an option to do so. Whether they do it, I don't know. We'll see. Like he said, they keep pushing things back. So it's going to be interesting how things play out.
Did you have any thoughts on that, Taylor?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because the analogy Paul Schrader made kind of assumed that there'd be a whole, next year everyone's going to have their films ready, but if production's halted, it's not exactly the same situation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not like an extraordinarily talented draft class is waiting in the wings to take the attention away.
if anything, it's probably the people, the indie filmmakers who are in production with people they could only get for a small window who are
There
probably
you go.
the most screwed right now.
There you go. Dude, think about having to redo all your location contracts.
Yeah.
When,
Yeah, you have
no,
to do
that's the real
whole-
part. Yeah, see, that's the one right there that no one is talking about. Why are we worried about the completed films that could be marketed while nobody else is making them? It's the stuff that can't be completed.
On the other hand, I heard an interview with Jason Blum recently talking about one of his films that's in production, and his director has now been able to go and take 2 weeks worth of footage, cut that, and decide what his movie still needs, and sort of rejigger some things in the interim. So maybe it's going to be a boon for some productions.
Well, that just sounds like studios not meddling and giving you the time to make the product you want.
All right, so I think that's about it for Yay or Nay News. Make sure to leave us a question in the YouTube comments or by emailing us at intercutpod@gmail.com to get it featured on the next show. You can also reach out to us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram at intercutpod. We are at intercutpod on all three. Be an intercutie and send us your movie, TV, and entertainment questions. We're getting into our topic of the week. It's HBO bracket time, because HBO has been a destination for high-quality programming. For years, they've developed a reputation for prestige shows, and it's not just TV after all, it's HBO. So we brought on Taylor to help us determine the best of the best. The best HBO show. We'll be posting our bracket later to Twitter if you want to follow along or fill out your own. The seeds here are organized from oldest show to newest one. But before we start and actually get into the bracket, I wanted to ask not what you guys think is the best HBO show, but when you hear that iconic HBO static intro, what show are you expecting to see after?
Lately, for me, it's been The Sopranos. But I kind of put that on hold to start Mr. Robot, so I have like
Nice.
a backlog. But yeah, recently it's definitely been that.
What you associate with it?
Yeah, and then I think before that, probably just Game of Thrones.
Nice.
I was gonna double up on that. I think for a lot of people who were binging Game of Thrones, that's probably what they associated with, especially because that's probably the one show everyone was watching live. You know, we talked about how that was probably the last big thing, which is interesting. Now that we're all at home, maybe there will be some other stuff that ends up becoming that, filling that void. But everyone tuned in and saw it at the same time, which I think was super special. For me right now, it's Curb. I hear shh, and right afterward I hear bum, bum, bum. So yeah, that's mine right now. What about you?
Yeah, that's the same for me. Just because Curb has been on the air for so long, I feel like I may have watched more episodes of Curb than any other episodes of other HBO programming. Maybe I'm
Makes sense.
misremembering that, but you know, it's been in our lives for 20 years now, so it's a long time to associate it with that sound. All right, so let's get started here. We're going to start with our 1 versus 32 matchup. Again, the oldest show on our bracket versus the newest show. Before we get there, though, some shows we eliminated because we, the three of us, haven't seen enough to necessarily do them justice in this bracket. A few others we eliminated because we just didn't think they were the 32 best HBO shows. But shout out to some of the ones that I know will get mentioned, like True Blood, John Adams, Togetherness, Room 104, Ballers, Vice Principals, Righteous Gemstones, Black Lady Sketch Show. You know, there's some of them that were too new. Some of them maybe we aren't old enough to have caught, like Arliss. Although I don't know if there's a lot of fans of Arliss out there.
What? They didn't make it in?
But we will talk about. Let's talk about the ones that actually did make it into
All right.
our bracket. First matchup is Oz versus Euphoria. Art. This is a show that was on when we were very young. A show that was on maybe before Taylor was born. What are you going with in the Oz Euphoria matchup?
Yeah, I know we're going from the oldest to the newest, and I love Euphoria. I think it is a perfect season. It is still ongoing, but people know my love for Euphoria. So you have to understand that when I say Oz, the first HBO original hour-long drama is a classic that should be up there. And it is to some people, but not to many when they think HBO. I think this should be one that's on more people's radar. And I think just off of the three things that I'm going: quality, rewatchability, and just culturally. Euphoria's new, and when we do this bracket again, it's gonna destroy for me. But right now, I gotta go Oz.
Taylor, do you have a preference between the two? Have you seen Oz?
Yeah, I haven't seen Oz.
That's fair.
But I mean, I definitely understand. It's like the first quote unquote HBO show, as we understand that now. And I liked Euphoria. I wasn't maybe as blown away by it.
Oh,
as
really?
But I mean, I thought it was solid, but I don't see it quite paving the ground that Oz did. Maybe there's no ground left to pave like Oz paved.
True.
Yeah. I might just lean with Euphoria here because I haven't seen enough of Oz, but maybe that's on us. We'll go with Euphoria just because some recency bias there.
Yeah.
We've been accused of it in the past.
This whole first round is going to be a little tough for me. Just a warning.
It's all good.
That's totally fine. Our next matchup is Girls versus Game of Thrones. Not expecting a lot of defense for Girls here.
Hey, I don't know. There's that one scene with Adam Driver getting all limp in. I'm going Game of Thrones. Like I said, a lot of people always talk about the coffee cups as if that's supposed to destroy me rewatching Battle of the Bastards. Oh,
right.
Bro, you could put 3 coffee cups in there. Not the greatest finale. We get that. We know that. But everything that came before is 6 and prior to that, come on.
Yeah.
Same for you, Taylor? Zach?
Yeah, I've only seen a few episodes of Girls. I'd like to rewatch it and like properly get into it. I don't think I really gave it the time I should have, but it's really hard to pit that against Game of Thrones, which was the cultural epicenter of the decade.
Yeah, I think Girls sometimes is unfairly maligned, and there are some genuinely great episodes of it, but Game of Thrones was a phenomena, so it advances here. Our next matchup is Deadwood versus High Maintenance. Now, Deadwood is thought of to be one of the great HBO dramas, the David Milch written Western, very raunchily dialogued, but if we're talking about High Maintenance, this is one of my favorite HBO shows, the anthology series of sorts that gives you different characters in each episode, all interconnected in a loose way. You know where I'm going. Art, how about you?
I'm going Deadwood.
Oof. Tell me why.
Well, I think quality-wise, I was like, oh no, there's a better Western show. No, there's not. There's not. You know, and when I couldn't answer that, that's when I can. And I love High Maintenance. Plus, I also want to see what Taylor says.
You don't want to. I've only seen a couple episodes of High Maintenance, and I haven't seen Deadwood. So
I think that's a vote for High Maintenance.
I really don't feel good about voting either
I will
way.
say that Deadwood, to this day, they just made a movie to it. So I think that's definitely one of the ones that it has the rewatchability to it. But of course, I'm going because I'm more biased towards High Maintenance. Don't get me wrong. But according to my 3 criteria, it would be Deadwood. But I do not mind High Maintenance going higher.
Our next matchup, Insecure versus The Wire. Another just unfair first-round matchup. A lot of people love Insecure. Insecure it is a great show.
Fantastic.
Issa Rae has been a breakout star from it, but we're talking about the Great American Novel as a TV series. I don't expect
What was
much
that article that said Insecure was better than Breaking Bad?
I don't think that article's out there.
Don't exist, but the one for The Wire does. So it's got to be The Wire, absolutely all the way.
This next matchup is the one that really is breaking my heart in the first round. Curb Your Enthusiasm versus Succession. Taylor, have you seen either of these?
I've seen some episodes of Curb. I haven't seen any Succession. So, I mean...
So not strong either way here?
Yeah. I like Curb a lot from what I've seen.
It's Curb. Zach was talking about how Curb's been with us for 20 years. I just started watching it last month. These guys have always told me to catch this show. They're like, bro, it's going to be you when you're older. I was like, what? All right, let's see. This is me right now, practically. The stuff that this man complains about. It's been out for 20 years. I've seen it from... I feel like I've been with this man throughout this entire quarantine. It's the only thing that's keeping me sane. So, Curb all the way.
It's funny because they're such opposite shows in the way they deliver their comedy. Curb through the improvised and hilarious antics of Larry David. Succession through the most sharply written punchlines and devastating insults.
Easily.
I love Succession. I am going to go Succession, but I've been outvoted here.
Dare you? You're telling me Succession has... Well, it does have a great theme. Push a rap over it. Never mind. But the endings, dude. Every single ending of Curb is great. Yeah. And then, Zach, you got to mention... Well, no, we'll mention it since it won later. I got some other stuff for Curb to say, but we'll save it.
A matchup of iconic HBO comedies, Silicon Valley versus Eastbound and Down. I personally am more into the satire of tech culture than the vulgarities of Danny McBride, so I'm going Silicon Valley here.
Silicon Valley.
I'll go Silicon Valley as well. Why not?
Then How to Make It in America versus True Detective. Art, you wanted How to Make America on this list.
Yeah, I think I had also said I didn't want it against True Detective. How to Make It in America is a cute show. And it stars Kid Cudi, and I remember watching it not even knowing that it was like a... Again, I didn't know what HBO was. It was like, ooh, this is quality television. I was just like, yo, this is the rapper in a show. You know, this is during the time where Drake was also, you know, we're looking back at him being in Degrassi, and out of all those performances, I was like, nah, this guy was like actually acting and stuff, and he would go on to do Need for Speed and whatever else afterwards. But I think it's a decent show. True Detective Season 1's a masterpiece. Masterpiece.
Yeah. I think we're going to go True Detective here. The next matchup, another one that pains me to see, is Barry versus The Sopranos. Taylor, you were just saying that you've been watching some Sopranos.
Yeah,
is that the way you're leaning here?
I'm going to have to, and I really like Barry. I watched both seasons in one day, and I was
so good.
A lot more impressed by it than I expected to be. And I'm only 2 seasons into The Sopranos, but it's still... There's something about Barry that feels a little more... just the way it's made, it feels a little less... realized than The Sopranos. I don't know exactly how to articulate what I'm getting at here, but just the way every episode is structured in The Sopranos is like you're tuning into something like each episode is like a full course meal. Whereas Barry, I feel like season by season you can kind of breeze through without even realizing you've seen a season, which is why I like it a lot, but I have to hand it to The Sopranos on this one.
Yeah.
Same for The Sopranos.
Yeah, Sopranos is a legacy show. There's a reason they call it basically like the start of the golden era of TV. I mean, I kind of want to go Barry because I love Barry, but I know I'd be wrong. It's The Sopranos.
Hey, Barry in a couple years. Remember, this bracket changes in a couple years. Easily.
Yeah. The Larry Sanders Show versus Watchmen. Taylor, I know you were a fan of Watchmen, right?
Yeah, I liked it a good amount. I haven't seen Larry Sanders.
Yo, okay, let me get my piece for Larry Sanders. Yo, Larry Sanders was ahead of its time. When this man passed, like, I went back to see a couple of the episodes they had. A lot of the sketch comedy shows that we have now, they come from this man. This man was breaking so many things of like just a meta culture of like being able to have somebody who's in a major production and now they're playing themselves within the show, and he's like, I'm gonna have to go Larry Sanders.
Okay, I wasn't expecting you to do that. I am definitely going Larry Sanders here. It is so funny.
Yes.
Just in the way that it does this sort of meta analysis of celebrity, and it has all these people showing up as subversions of their real selves. I mean, the comedy is just so much at the root of the way that our modern comedy is, that just some of the awkwardness and tics of Larry's behavior in this. It's a show that more people need to watch because I feel like it gets left off of those greatest HBO show ever lists.
Dude,
I love Watchmen. But
yeah, you do. You watched it 3 times.
3 times.
But this thing has aged beautifully. Like I said, you go back and it still works. It works just as great as when you go back and watch season 1 Curb. Like all of it, just it works so smoothly.
Yeah. So that one's Larry Sanders's. The Leftovers versus Boardwalk Empire. This is actually one where I feel like I haven't watched enough of either. I've checked out a couple episodes the first seasons of both, but Art, where do you feel on this matchup?
I'm really tied between the two, but I'm gonna have to go Leftovers.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
The Damon Lindelof show that is not Watchmen.
No. And don't get me wrong, if have you seen Boardwalk?
Me?
Taylor?
No, I haven't seen either.
Oh, you haven't seen Leftovers either. Between you, Zach, then, out of the two, at least for the most that you've seen, I think that because Leftovers went, I think 3 seasons, maybe 4, whereas Boardwalk, much more expansive for what it is. I love all of the actors that came out of there, but I think one gives better emotional performances, and I think has a better finale.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard amazing things about The Leftovers. So there are people who talk about that among the great HBO shows. And unfortunately, I've only seen bits from the first season. I've heard it gets so much better as it progresses, but
Watchmen was my first Lindelof show, so I was like, oh, this is cool, I'm sold. But I did have some problems with the ending, but I've heard The Leftovers is like...
Primo.
Yeah, pretty much the same
Speaking
quality,
of,
but sticks the landing.
Now that you've learned of our Lord Lindelof, have you heard of Lost?
Yeah, I've heard about it here and there.
That's a whole other rewatch. But yeah, I feel like people don't talk about Boardwalk Empire with that same type of reverence. Yeah. So we'll go Leftovers here. A weird matchup: Flight of the Conchords versus The Night of. I told Art to go back and watch some Flight of the Conchords for this because this is kind of my introduction to like Jermaine Clement, and Taika Waititi directed some of this. It's got that quirky humor that he's become very known for. Night of, on the other hand, is just like a stark drama, exploring like a possible worst case scenario. Art, do you want to go one or the other here?
Believe it or not, had not seen any of these before this thing. Went in. Flight of the Conchords. If we're talking about a show, and I don't love it, but I respect it. These are guys who made something out of nothing. It's a beautiful ending. It's only 2 seasons. What a great beginning, middle, end. It's quirky. You had mentioned that this Taika had directed a couple of the episodes. And I really feel like this was a jumping off point. These guys used HBO, went on and created crazy other stuff. The Night of is great. We are going to see better versions of podcasts like procedurals being turned into miniseries.
Yeah.
Right? So I'll leave it there. Poor Riz Ahmed. You know, you would have thought that would have, poor Riz Ahmed.
Right.
Had Star Wars in that. That's how you know. This thing was shot on DV cameras, and they went out to do Ragnarok and who knows what else.
Yeah. Night of feels like it belongs to a genre or a type of show. Flight of the Conchords feels somewhat singular in its type of comedy. So, I'm happy to go Flight of the Conchords here.
I haven't seen Night of, but I'm pretty ride or die Flight of the Conchords, so...
Wow!
Awesome!
Okay.
No complaints there.
Okay. Dope. That'll be an interesting second round.
The battle of miniseries, or maybe not so miniseries, Big Little Lies versus Band of Brothers. Taylor, do you have a leaning in this category?
Genre-wise, I'm probably more inclined to go with Big Little Lies, but I might just have to hand it to Band of Brothers, because Band of Brothers knew to keep it a miniseries, where Big Little Lies did not.
I'm not going to say anything else. Thank you, Taylor. Thank you,
right.
Band of Brothers.
We're going Band of Brothers with that matchup. The next is 6 Feet Under versus the Young Pope / the New Pope. For me, I go 6 Feet Under here. I love that show. I think it's got one of the great series finales of all time, and just its ruminations on mortality, and it feels so rare in the TV landscape. It's a show that it makes you feel very alive, and it's got some beautiful character observations, as well as just a unique sense of humor, and just the way that it would structure its episodes too, just builds in so much tension from the very beginning. I really love 6 Feet Under. It's a show that I've wanted to revisit for a while because I burned through that series a while ago, and it immediately became one of my favorites. What about you guys?
This would be the only matchup that I have not seen either for in this entire bracket. I know of both, and between... You went for which one?
6 Feet Under.
I have worked on 3 videos in this past year where the actors have talked about the director told me to watch 6 Feet Under and be that character. So, out of the 2, I don't think anyone's going, yeah, I'm going to need you to watch The Young Pope. I'm going to need you to watch The Young Pope and come in and imitate that performance. Still going to binge both of them. But to be completely honest with you, 6 Feet Under, I didn't even want to rush it.
Yeah.
Before watching this. That is literally, because that's the one with Jared Leto, right? When they still liked Jared Leto?
I don't think
Or am I thinking of completely different? Where's Jared Leto in? Is he not in this one?
No.
All right, then I'm thinking a completely different show then. Never mind. Take away everything that I've said. But I'd probably still go 6 Feet Under between the 2 of them.
Yeah, I haven't seen The Young Pope, but 6 Feet Under was probably my first or second HBO show, so it was a very formative. It was very formative in my relationship with HBO. So.
All right, so we'll go 6 Feet Under there. I'm happy for that to advance. The next matchup is Westworld versus Entourage, 2 shows that have alternately been adored and ridiculed depending on their different arcs and seasons. Art, which one do you go with here?
Westworld.
Yeah. It's a much more ambitious show, certainly.
Yeah, my boy can say Entourage.
I'm not gonna say Entourage. I've seen all of Entourage and only the first season, and then the first episode of season 2 for Westworld. So I haven't gotten to the very polarizing aspects of the show yet.
Yeah.
But I mean, based on season 1 alone, I'd still pick it over Entourage.
Yeah, I mean, Entourage is a show that I've spent a lot of time with, but I still can't really get myself to vote for it here. You know?
Interesting.
So I'll go with Westworld as well.
And to Entourage's credit, I think it's one of those shows that people call it problematic for aspects that within the show are supposed to be like pointing out problematic things to an extent, of course.
Like calling out Curb.
It's funny with Entourage because it began sort of as a parody of Hollywood and then kind of became a parody of itself.
Yeah, by the end. Yeah.
Enlightened versus Veep. Art, I know you checked out a little bit of Enlightened before this bracket.
Yeah, those I only saw a couple of episodes. Same with Veep because I haven't finished all of Veep either.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of indifferent to both.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm going off of my 3, the sweeps that Veep has done. When has that not appeared in the Emmys?
Right. It certainly is a much more lauded show and celebrated show, even though Enlightened is definitely a kind of cult comedy classic in a way. And the Laura Dern performance at the center of it, I think it gets ignored in this recent adulation of Laura Dern. But Veep is certainly the more iconic of the 2 shows.
And I just got to the Curb episode where she's trying to find a home for her new show, and they're like, HBO's pretty good. So that's hilarious.
Our last matchup of the first round is Sex and the City versus Chernobyl. Taylor, are you going to go Sex and the City here?
Unfortunately, I have not seen Sex and the City. If I had, I don't know how I would begin to compare the 2.
Yeah, I've seen a bit of Sex and the City. I mean, to say that I'm not the demographic is probably like an understatement, at least. But Chernobyl was such a gripping series that I'm happy to go with it here.
Miranda and Girls.
All right, so moving on to our second round, we have Euphoria versus Game of Thrones. And again, as much as I think some of us are fans of what Euphoria's first season has done, we have a large catalog of Game of Thrones to draw from. High Maintenance versus The Wire. I love High Maintenance. It's really, really hard for me to vote against it in any category. But going up against The Wire, I think I'd be a little bit ridiculous to vote for High Maintenance.
The Wire.
Curb Your Enthusiasm versus Silicon Valley. Art, which is the superior HBO comedy.
Curb.
I think I would go with Curb as well. Taylor, in your limited watchings, would you say Curb as well?
Yeah, I've only seen a handful of episodes of Curb, and I've seen a few seasons of Silicon Valley. I'm not like all the way through it, but I still gotta hand it to Curb on this one.
That's literally the best way to and I love Silicon Valley. I love everything about Silicon Valley. The whole concept of don't sell what you have to give and keep it for yourself and build it with your people. Curb in 2 episodes. It's sheesh.
Sheesh.
True Detective versus The Sopranos. Taylor, does True Detective's masterful first season do enough to win it out over The Sopranos?
I've seen 2 seasons of each. One has a far superior second season to the other.
Yup.
Gotta give it to The Sopranos.
Sopranos.
The Larry Sanders Show versus The Leftovers. Art, I think I'm going to go Larry Sanders here, but you've seen more of both, or more of Leftovers at least. So.
Oh. See, so I had told you that out of quality, rewatchability, and culturally, Larry Sanders does more.
Yeah.
I would say. Just off of the comment, I don't know how many times I want to sit back and go like, yo, you know what I really feel like watching today during this world? 2% of the population disappeared. Not that doesn't take away from the quality. I would say that it probably beats Leftovers beats Larry in quality, probably, but in rewatchability and even culturally, I don't think Leftovers pushed people to be like, oh my gosh, people disappearing. Like, people are going to say Endgame or who knows, whatever else. But what Larry Sanders, like we don't think it's respected enough for what it's set up that has been imitated throughout everywhere. You know, people will attribute what they do to something else, not realizing that that something else got it from Larry Sanders. So,
exactly,
Larry Sanders.
Exactly. Our next matchup is Flight of the Conchords versus Band of Brothers. Taylor, what are some of the similarities you think between these two shows?
The similarities. They are HBO productions.
They are from this century.
Yeah. Yeah, hard as it is to compare, I think I'm going to go with Flight of the Conchords.
Awesome.
As powerful as Band of Brothers can be, I don't know. Maybe Flight of the Conchords is just a little more what I feel like watching most often.
I can't disagree with that.
Yeah.
Because I get it. I get the love for Flight. Like, I begrudgingly was like, oh, just watch this. And they get you with the ending. Band of Brothers, my dude. That is a miniseries. Like, when I think miniseries, I think that.
Yeah, no, it really is a
was
staple.
given to me in DVDs, like ripped DVDs. And we were, like, sharing it throughout our group before we knew of HBO Now or Go or any of that. So, Zach.
Art, when you think miniseries, you think Band of Brothers. When I think comedy, I think about the Hip Hop Hippopotamus. I'm going to go Flight of Conchords here. It just, I don't know. Like, it's such an idiosyncratic show. I really love. I just, it's so funny to me. There's so many different bits that I can recall, and I just think my ability to recall specifics around Flight of the Conchords is so much so much greater than my ability to recall specifics around Band of Brothers. Maybe Band of Brothers gets sort of mixed in with all the other war dramas I've seen like
the Pacific and everything else that came after it. Cool. Best thing about Band of Brothers is I say goodbye to it, rewatch it and any of the episodes and be like, what's the meme that's going on around with Leo? You'll recognize so many actors.
Yeah.
That ended up being massive. From, like, I think Tom Hardy was in there to what's his name from Split, X-Men, all that Atonement. What's his name? McAvoy. Like, there's so many young actors that were in that. So for that alone, if you haven't given it a rewatch, even if you've seen it, go back to it and be like, wow, that person was in there. So
6 Feet Under versus Westworld. Taylor, you said that 6 Feet Under was one of your first HBO shows.
Yeah, I definitely have to go 6 Feet Under on this one, even though I haven't seen most, I guess, at this point of Westworld. I mean, I couldn't stop watching 6 Feet Under,
Yeah.
even though all of it had been out. But yeah, it's I don't know what else to say. Gotta hand it to 6 Feet Under.
I would totally go with 6 Feet Under too. I just think, like you said, I think it's just a harder show to put down. Westworld can sometimes feel like homework occasionally, and maybe you haven't gotten to that point of the show yet. But I was riveted throughout 6 Feet Under.
I don't know 6 Feet Under. I thought it was my so-called life, so don't go.
Veep versus Chernobyl. Again, very different shows here. But I think we all have spent more time admiring Chernobyl.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't even seen Veep, so it's hard for me to say. But, I gave Chernobyl the top rating on my channel, so hard to beat that.
Hey, yeah. I mean, it's the highest rated, one of the highest rated things on IMDb, on Letterboxd,
just
swept the
Band of
Emmys, everything. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, really, when you look at it, this thing, and Craig Mazin has killed every aspect of distributing the show, from a complimentary podcast to go with it. It's honestly, I feel like I'm not done watching Chernobyl because I haven't done my video on it yet. I feel like there's just so much that it's covering, and then it becomes scarier when we came into 2020.
Right.
So yeah.
All right, so we are in the Elite Eight here. Only good shows pretty much from this point out. The best of the best. Starting with Game of Thrones versus The Wire. The biggest HBO show ever versus the one that's probably the most critically acclaimed. Two shows that are somewhat maligned for their last season, although in very different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Art, which one are you going to go with here?
The Wire.
Obviously, yeah. Do we have any defense for Game of Thrones here? I feel like somebody watching this video will be outraged, but
I've got one. Remember when we talked about how things can't make millions of dollars at home?
You got a point there.
Yeah, I mean, Game of Thrones had the monoculture belt for a while, but ultimately what I value when we're talking about this best HBO show bracket is the quality aspect, right? And just like the amount that The Wire has gotten me to think more deeply about the world around me, the way in which it's reflected real world problems in a way that a fantasy show can't. I mean, I am inclined towards a show that's more like The Wire than Game of Thrones, but I also just think The Wire is uniquely brilliant.
Mm-hmm. And it's not to take away from the crazy stuff that Game of Thrones did. These battles that will test, there's better than some of the stuff that came out cinematically.
Shout out the Red Wedding.
Yeah, so but The Wire had an ending.
Taylor, you
Yeah.
feel also that we should go with The Wire here?
I haven't seen The Wire, but as someone who's only seen Game of Thrones, I do think it's, for as great as a lot of the moments in season 6 were, I do think it started to drop off as early as season 5. And so when literally half the seasons of a show aren't up to the par established by the first half.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Our next matchup is Curb Your Enthusiasm versus The Sopranos. Art, which way do you lean here?
Okay, one's got quality, for sure. But the other one has rewatchability. So culturally, it has to come down to the biggest one, which is Sopranos.
I see your argument there, although all three could maybe go either way. But yeah, to me, I think I would agree with you too. I mean, Sopranos has had such a lasting impact on the way we make and consume television, I feel like.
Literally, I feel it's when we started saying, it's what got HBO to... It's the reason why we disrespected Oz. Because they treated this like it was the first one. This is when they really went like, yo, we are not TV, we are HBO. And it took them 20 years to finally get to the streaming age where we're making a When They See Us. And HBO's still making Chernobyl. So, like, yeah, this is the alpha. It's Oz, but this is the alpha to many people.
And even in terms of rewatchability, like my roommate who had seen the whole show would sit down and watch Sopranos episodes with me.
For sure.
So,
yeah,
that's something as well.
Yeah. Larry Sanders versus Flight of the Conchords, another HBO comedy clash. Taylor, what is it about Flight of the Conchords that you think it deserves to maybe go all the way?
Well, you guys have made a strong case for Larry Sanders, and I'll check it out as soon as I can at this point. But Flight of the Conchords isn't even like... It's not that there's any like specific thing about it that puts it above the rest. I think it's just every episode is so consistently funny. And even the music is like... Because I'm pretty sure they wrote the episodes to contextualize the songs.
Yeah, a lot of the songs predate the series.
Yeah, which I think is a pretty neat way of writing a series.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was never less than enthralled by Flight of the Conchords.
Totally.
That's what I want the review to be for the 4K. I was never less than enthralled. Taylor J. Williams.
There we go.
And those are all great arguments that I agree with as well. But as I've talked about, I just have such a deep adoration for the Larry Sanders Show. So that's my vote. I'm guessing that's Art's vote as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then our last round of 8 matchup is between 6 Feet Under and Chernobyl. Taylor, which way do you vote in that matchup?
This has probably been the toughest one yet. I think I have to hand it to 6 Feet Under, though. I think Chernobyl was the best thing that could have been made out of it. I mean, it really... I think it... Obviously, it just came out, so it's hard to say what influence it'll have over miniseries moving forward, but I really do think it has paved some new ground. And it was so prescient just in terms of what we're going through right now and how things are being managed, and the idea that sure there are catastrophic accidents, but the way we manage them is a lot more crucial to the damage done.
Absolutely.
At the same time, 6 Feet Under is really just one... I don't know, the way... I guess the magic realist aspects of it, the fantasies and visions and stuff that characters have, at face value, it's just a regular drama with people dealing with relationships, but it really does tap into something a lot more spiritual, and I think that's why it's one of the best. I'm gonna go with 6 Feet Under for this round.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's not a lot of drama that really wants to tackle mortality and sort of the idea of like how to deal with death and the way that 6 Feet Under does so brazenly and boldly and really is so captivating and emotionally honest. I think it's strange that in all this time there's no other show that's been quite like it.
Yeah.
So I totally agree. I'm gonna go with 6 Feet Under here. Art,
Chernobyl.
You want to say you're bad at Chernobyl?
When They See Us should have won the Emmy.
So in our semifinals, we've got The Wire versus The Sopranos and The Larry Sanders Show versus 6 Feet Under. Let's start with the hotly debated question of what's the best HBO drama ever. It tends to come down to The Wire versus The Sopranos, and we've got that matchup neatly aligned for us here. Art, which way do you go?
The Wire.
Any reason you choose The Wire over The Sopranos?
Yeah, I think because if we ended this podcast with just cutting to black, no one would agree.
Some people don't like that last season of The Wire.
Some people don't like that last nothing of The Sopranos.
Okay. And Taylor, you said you haven't seen The Wire, so
Yeah.
I'm guessing you
So-
feel like this one should be The Sopranos.
Perfect.
If I'm the tiebreaker, then
Perfect.
I gotta go The Wire as well.
Hey! Why, Zach? Why do you hate The Sopranos?
I tend to revert to talking about how unique things are, but again, in the way that The Wire sort of resets itself in each season and becomes about something new while maintaining a narrative momentum and further fleshing out its world is just so effective in giving you a picture of this Baltimore world. I don't know. I got to go to The Wire. So we're picking The Wire, first of our finalists. It's going to go up against The Larry Sanders Show versus 6 Feet Under. Taylor, you spoke really eloquently about what you liked about 6 Feet Under. Art, you've also talked a lot about why you feel Larry Sanders is really influential. I think this puts me in a very difficult position as a big fan of both of these shows. I don't know. Do you guys want to sway me?
I mean, I don't really have any, I don't know. I haven't seen Larry Sanders.
Yeah.
But I'm, of course, ride or die 6 Feet Under.
I would say between them, Zach, judging by quality, rewatchability, and culturally in the arts, what stands out to you? Because it's going to have to go up against The Wire. So maybe you're probably just picking the second best favorite HBO show.
Right. And if I got to pick that way, then the one that I have been more tempted to revisit, rewatchability being one of your standards here, is The Larry Sanders Show.
Really? Whoa!
Yeah. There's just all these different bits that I remember that I feel reminded of when I watch more modern comedies that I try to go back and watch with the show. I really do think it's the overlooked show in the HBO catalog. 6 Feet Under is another one of those overlooked shows, but maybe Larry Sanders a little bit more even.
So Taylor, if it came down to the show you had to binge for the rest of this quarantine, what would it be after sitting through this whole thing? Because really, this is just brackets. Who cares what it ends up being? The main point we do this is to get shows on people's radar. We've added some to your radar. Between these two, which would you want to catch?
Well, had you asked me before this bracket, I would have said The Wire, just because that's been probably the most consistent show that's been second in my watch list. And then as soon as I'm done with something, I'll add something else above it. So The Wire is just perpetually in second place.
It's like that for a lot of people.
You guys made a really strong case for Larry Sanders. But to call it the best HBO show, my only perspective here is from what I've seen as a third party in pop cultural discussions. So I guess I'd hand it to The Wire, just because from my perspective that seems to have been a lot more influential, even if they're different genres, and the implicit influence of Larry Sanders might prevail to some.
I'm surprised Larry Sanders made it this far.
Same. I was expecting it to get eliminated against Watchmen, so I'm just happy.
I'm surprised that you and I think because we just knew of the show, and that's the craziest part when it comes to a lot of these. It's like, if something isn't given, the attention to it, we don't even know if it slips under the cracks and ends up becoming something that's as influential as it. That said, when you aim at the king, you got to go for the head, Zach. And there's no better show. There is no other show that gets brought up more. It's like when you're talking about top 5 rappers and you see the same people get brought up, that even if you don't agree with one of the 5, cool. For the rest of your life, you will see them be brought up. The Wire will be brought up in every discussion dealing with the best of TV. It's even plagued some other AMC shows that cannot be mentioned without a Wire fan coming in. Some people don't even know that they use GIFs from this thing to a ridiculous degree. It has one of the most popular ones. The guy that goes... People don't even realize that's from The Wire. Is Idris Elba kills it in his performances. Just everything dealing with The Wire, I think... once people move it from their number 2 spot to their currently watching, I feel like it doesn't disappoint. Be it how people feel about the ending, it's one of the most standout pieces of television that I think, if we're talking cross-platforms, is up there with Breaking Bad, is up there with HBO's The Sopranos, Mad Men, all of these great shows. That's where I would put The Wire, and it's the reason why I would believe in this bracket has earned the spot of being the best.
All right, so that's about it for our topic of the week and the best HBO show bracket. What won your HBO bracket? What is the best HBO show? We want to know your opinion. Let us know in the comments
Have
down
you
below,
seen Larry
or
Sanders?
by shooting us an email, or by hitting us up on social media, whatever your platform. It's at Intercut Pod. We are going to go to our final segment. It's the new to see, where we give you our picks for the week, what you should be watching at home. Art, what are you recommending?
Well, for my streaming and then VOD, because we don't have theatrical stuff, I have Bad Education, which is actually one that we were able to do an interview for. We rarely do any interviews, but when we get the chance to do so, it's for something that we like. This fact, loved. It's on HBO, Bad Education. I was worried that this had some of the best performances of the year and wasn't going to be eligible for an Oscar. Now
All
it
that's
is.
changed.
Yo, Bad Education. We just finished the HBO bracket. It's known for TV, and now it's being known for movies. There's between this and The Tale, it's been a huge gap in between. But one of the best movies, one of my favorite movies of the year, Bad Education. And another one that I would recommend. It's weird, but it's VOD for To the Stars with a little asterisk on Zach knows. A particular version that isn't available in VOD, because when we caught this at Sundance, it was in black and white. So if you're going to release it in VOD, why add color and change the director's intention? Zach,
The Samuel Goldwyn films picked up To the Stars out of Sundance, and I believe one of the conditions they had, because we heard the director speaking about how hard it was to sell a black and white movie, was that they get to release this movie in color, which gives you this very weird thing of a film that was shot to be on black and white that then gets color graded in this kind of odd way. If you just watch the colored version in the trailer, it just sort of looks a little bit off, but it's beautifully shot in black and white. And if you go to, I think it's Alamo Drafthouse Westchester's website, you can pay to watch the virtual theater version in black and white. So seek that out. We'll
weird
leave a link for it
loophole,
down
but
below.
if you're going to watch
Or
it,
did they
I'd
color
recommend
it? Did they shoot it in color and then make it black and white?
I believe so.
So it's not like they had to recolor shot black and white footage?
I don't
No,
think
it's
so.
just lit for black and white.
It's lit for black and white, which we know the importance of it, because I think we have the Q&A recorded, and she had mentioned that she had brought it up even since before then, that they had to have a version of it that was colored to sell it, and sadly, they chose that to be it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Taylor, how about you? What would you
Well,
recommend people check out?
Unfortunately, I think the only 2020 movies I've seen so far were Sonic and Harley Quinn.
It's all good. All recommendations are valid.
So I'm gonna cheat a little and recommend Deerskin.
Awesome.
No, that's perfect.
Because I was quite impressed by it, considering my relationship with Rubber from how many years ago.
Yeah. Another movie that's out in virtual theaters. That's something we haven't talked about a lot on the show, but it's been a great way to support some of your local movie theaters and movie theaters that haven't been able to be open recently. So definitely seek out Deerskin. I would second that recommendation as well. My picks for the week are Run, which is currently airing on HBO. It's a limited series that's written by Vicky Jones, who did some writing on Fleabag and even directed the stage play version of Fleabag. So there's a sharpness to the dialogue. In fact, it's very one of my favorite scripts so far this year in television. Just the opening. If you watch the opening of the show and imagine what it must have been like on the page, it's got such a gripping first few minutes, and it plays out a little bit like a play. So far I'm enjoying the dynamic between Merritt Wever and Donald Gleason on there. Also, another movie that's in theaters, one that we caught 2 Sundances ago, The Infiltrators. It's a interesting mix of documentary and narrative, sort of along the lines of American Animals, a movie that came out I think 2 years ago now, where you get sort of some of this documentary footage of this group that's working on behalf of immigrants that have been detained to try and free them, and in order to show you what it's like behind bars, they recreate that using some narrative elements. It's an interesting movie, and if you're interested in the subject, I think you'll be able to get past some of the shaky acting and maybe not so believable acting from certain people, but it's a cool idea, and I liked some of the execution of it. And lastly, maybe the best of them all is The Assistant, which is going to be out now on Hulu as well as VOD. Our girl Julia Garner from Ozark, as we were mentioning earlier, she gets the starring role here in this sort of Me Too inspired movie, and something that's really well done in the way that it sort of implicates everybody in this situation. So I'd highly recommend you check that one out too.
Dope. Sounds good.
Yeah. But that's about all for this week's show. You can catch more from me, Zach Shevich, by following me on Twitter, Instagram, or Letterboxd at ZShevich. That's ZSHEV as in Silicon Valley, ICH. And then check out my YouTube channel at youtube.com/multiplex show. Taylor, let people know where they can find more from you.
Right, so my YouTube channel is my name, Taylor J. Williams. I just uploaded a new video after like 4 months yesterday. Very excited about that.
It's a good one.
Thank you. Be posting more frequently in the future, and my Instagram is at Taylor_J_Williams, and my Twitter is at TaylorFilmGuy, as is my Letterboxd.
Very cool.
Dope.
Very cool. Art?
You can find me on the A to Z Show, I Love Me, and all that other good stuff on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, or every week here on the Intercut Podcast.
You can listen to every episode of the Intercut Podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, or your favorite podcatcher. I like Overcast. And then make sure you're subscribed not just to the audio podcast, but to the video feed as well on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/IntercutPod, where you can catch our bright, smiling faces as we break down the latest in entertainment. Find new episodes of Intercut every Friday, and please leave us a comment, like the video, consider heading over to iTunes to give us a 5-star review, and shout out to those of you that have. It's really, really appreciated. Like our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages, all of them are at IntercutPod to get updates throughout the week from Art, from me, from all of our guests here, including Taylor. Thanks again for tuning in, and until next time, what's a better way to repair a friendship than by doing drugs together?